Good morning, everyone. We're just letting everybody join us. Give us a minute or two, and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everybody. Expecting a pretty good size group today, so looking forward to presenting for you.
And please, as you're joining us, let us know where you're from in the chat, maybe what the weather's like. We always like to hear where everybody's coming from.
See how the heat's treating you in the Central Valley this week?
Yeah. Ooh, sunny San Diego.
Oh, nice. Jealous. Atwater, okay. Fresno. Haven't been to Fresno in a couple of months. I'm due for a trip there.
Excellent. Well, Eli, if you're ready, since we've got a good crew, I'll get us kicked off and everyone can kind of join us as they're able.
Sounds good.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the CSI HR Investigating Workplace Problems webinar, sponsored by the Central Valley Regional HR Hotline. My name is Sarah Valente, and I'm a marketing specialist here at CEA. Before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to go over a few details with you. Your audio will be muted throughout the presentation, but we ask for your participation anyway. If you have questions pertaining to the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A box at any time, and we will try to address them as we go. Handouts for this presentation were attached to a reminder email that included the link to this presentation. If you need them resent, please put your email in the chat box and we will resend them to you. Because your feedback is important to us, please complete the survey by accessing the QR code at the end of the presentation. It shouldn't take more than a minute to complete and provides us with valuable feedback that we utilize to constantly improve on our webinars. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Eli Nunez, CEA HR Director.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody for joining us today as we talk about workplace investigations. Hopefully you haven't had to do too many of them because we know they can be they can be quite a handful. So we'll talk about some tips and tricks today, things to look out for and things to make them run as smoothly as possible and keep you compliant as well, which is always important. Before we go on, though, I'd like to remind everybody of the hotline for employers. And this is something that was put together by the Central Valley counties along with California Employers Association. This is a no-cost HR hotline for employers in the Central Valley counties. So as you can see, there's a different numbers depending on which county you're in. And you could call us over at CEA with any questions, whether it's about hiring or termination, sick leave, FMLA, leaves of absence, breaks, lunches, and overtime. As you know, those are some of the things that can really get you in trouble if we're not compliant with them, right? Questions about your handbooks, harassment prevention, remote workers, anything like that, give us a call. We're happy to talk to you, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. And you see the different hotlines for the different counties. So you may be asking, well, why isn't there just one number? It's because we really like to track to see where those calls are coming from, right? We provide the organizations a report just so they could see where most of these questions are coming and where those resources are being allocated. So if you have any questions or anything, even about this presentation, or if there's something you think about afterwards, give us a call at the hotline. We'd love to talk to you about it. And as I mentioned, we are from California Employers Association. And what we are is basically we focus on human resources, right? And our goal is to provide peace of mind for all our callers and our members by providing exceptional human resource compliance solutions, training, and recruiting services. So, if you are a member, you get unlimited phone support. Same with this hotline. Call us as many times a day as you need to, right? We'd love to get to know you, get to know more about your organization and how we can help as well. So what we can offer is quick answers to any HR questions, right? And most of the questions we get, we can solve usually over a quick phone call. Some of them are a little more involved, and then we can expand from there as needed. But again, it all starts with that call, right? Our members also get access to employment forms, policies, handbooks, guidelines. We also provide trainings, such as this webinar that you're attending today, or other trainings like harassment prevention or trainings for supervisors. And we also do consultation on workplace issues, negotiations, and investigations. Having said that, we do a lot, but one thing we are not is we are not lawyers, or better said, we are not your lawyers, right? We're not your legal counsel. So, as always, we have a disclaimer. This presentation is for educational purposes, not to be taken as legal advice. If you have any questions of legal nature, whether it's on this call or when you call the hotline, chances are we will refer you to your personal attorney for that, for a couple of reasons. One is we do not have attorney-client privilege when we speak to our members or to anybody calling the hotline, so all that is discoverable. The other one is, again, we are not licensed attorneys, so we cannot give legal advice. So we can talk about, what some of the guidelines are, what some of the laws are, but we cannot give you legal advice pertaining to your situation. So again, if you have any questions of a legal nature, please refer those to your attorney. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into the presentation here, talk about some of the things we'll be discussing today. Give you an overview about investigations in California, what's required, what the state requires of them, who oversees them, what agency does, all that good stuff. Some of the triggers for an investigation, when should you investigate? What's a sign that you should look into a problem? How to select an investigator. Sometimes it's somebody within your organization that could look into an issue. Sometimes you have to go outside the organization. We'll talk about the pros and cons of that and when those come into play. Planning the investigation, again, it's always good to jump into something with a game plan, right? It could change as you go along, lead you down a different road, but you want to have at least some kind of an outline or guideline of where you're going to go. We'll talk about the witness interviews, some tips, what to look for, how to conduct them, some best practices there, how to reach conclusions, and how to issue prompt corrective action to resolve the issue at the end of the investigation, right? Because again, what's the purpose of an investigation? If you find wrongdoing and then you don't do anything about it, at that point, you're just kind of spinning your wheels. So we'll talk about that very important follow-up at the end. Just to overview, investigations in the workplace are basically outlined or guided by FEHA, the Fair Employment and Housing Act, right? And basically what this tells us is that employers have to take all reasonable steps to correct any misconduct in the workplace, harassment, or anything that could lead to harassment, right? Now, what you'll hear a lot, and if you've participated in any of our other trainings, harassment prevention, that sort of thing, you'll hear a lot about knew or should have known, right? So when an employer knew or should have known that there was harassment, discrimination, or retaliation going on, then they can be liable for it. So again, what's this mean? It means that if you are a business owner and one of your supervisors, one of your leads, one of your, managers knows about something that's going on, doesn't act on it, doesn't escalate it to you, you can still be in trouble for it, because as your agents, once they find out about it, technically the organization should know about it and do something about it. That's part of their duties as managers or part of the supervisory team. So it's very important, when you're training your supervisors, training your managers, that you relay this responsibility to them and the importance of it as well, right? Now, FEHA also tells us that in order for to conduct an investigation, it should be done in a timely manner. So should be thorough and objective. So again, we are looking to get as much information about the issue as possible, witness statements, talking to the person making the allegations, talking to the accused, and we should be objective, right? So we're going to make the decision based on facts, not based on feelings, not based on our, gut. We're going to look at the facts to see what our conclusions are. We should always give the accused the opportunity to respond, right? If someone is accused, no matter how heinous the allegation is, we want to give them a chance to respond to the accusations. The purpose of an investigation is not to build a case for termination for somebody, to push somebody out of the organization, to railroad somebody. It's really to get the facts of the situation. So that's why it's so important to give the accused a chance to respond. Your conclusion should be well reasoned and supported by evidence. Again, we're not depending on feelings. We're not, depending on our gut. We're going to see where the evidence takes us. And finally, the result, if necessary, should be corrective action as appropriate at the end, right? If you find proof, or if your evidence shows that there was some kind of rules being violated or broken, or some kind of harassment or discrimination, there should be corrective action, that should be documented as appropriate to conclude the investigation. Something very important to keep in mind as well, and something that we touch on many different presentations, is protection against retaliation. So again, what this means is that an employer can't discipline an employee, whether it's by demoting him, terminating him, or whatever, because they reported an incident or participated in an investigation. And the thing to keep in mind is that claims of retaliation have gone up every year for about the past, I'd say, 4 or 5 years in the state of California, at least. And really, I mean, this is a protection that maybe was not there in the past for employees. So it basically meant that a lot of issues were not brought forth because people were afraid of retaliation, right? Hey, if I accuse my manager of doing something, they're just going to terminate me. Well, you know, the thing to keep in mind is that employees are protected even if their complaint proved to be, not unlawful, or they mistook something, or they were mistaken when they made that complaint, right? As long as it was a good faith allegation, as long as they reasonably believe that there was something wrong being done, or that something was being done against them, then they have protection against retaliation. Now, if they just accuse somebody, or someone's just accusing somebody else just out of maliciousness, that's a whole different story. But if there is a good faith belief that there is a wrongdoing going on, and they raise the accusation or raise the flag on it, then there is that they are protected from retaliation. Right. So, some very important. I mean, what we're looking for with this training is to equip you what we call the 3 R's. First one is recognition, right? We want to spot issues, inappropriate behaviors, anything that's going on in your workplace. And you want to spot them as soon as possible, right? Because one, if you manage a problem when it's just very small, when it's just starting, it's going to prevent it from becoming a bigger issue. How many of us have worked in a toxic workplace that maybe started with a small issue that could have been resolved, but it wasn't managed, and it just kind of kept growing and then growing and growing, just soured the whole group, right? So again, we want to recognize those problems early on and address them. Okay. Respect. That means, we are understanding different perspectives, right? We all see things different. We all have different backgrounds, different trainings, different positions with the company, different responsibilities. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind when we're managing these situations and when we are addressing and conducting our investigations. And finally, responsibility. If you're in the management position, whether it's a lead, manager, supervisor, whatever it is, a big part of our responsibility is to make sure that we maintain a harassment-free work environment, right? A respectful work environment. We are the ones basically setting the standards or setting the pace for our workforce out there. So how's this happen? Well, one, we model that behavior, right? We treat everybody respectfully. We also respond to any claims of harassment immediately. We address them. If it's something that we handle, we handle. If it's, beyond our scope, we escalate it as soon as possible, right? And then, if we do have to conduct an investigation, we prepare for it and conduct it as effectively as possible. If it's beyond the scope of our work, where we don't conduct the investigation ourselves, we participate in it, we help as much as we can to make that investigation be efficient and as thorough as possible. Now, a lot of the investigations, a lot of people focus on the big ones, right? Harassment, discrimination, anything that is seen as breaking some kind of law, right? And the important thing to keep in mind is a lot of these big issues start out maybe as something small within your organization, and that could be something like bullying, that could be something like small misconduct, sometimes fraud, right? These are the types of things that if we address them, we can prevent them from becoming bigger issues. And a lot of time, these are policy violations. They could seem like small policy violations, and we want to address them early on so they don't escalate. Something that starts as just horseplay or bullying could easily escalate into harassment, of a protected class or something like that. So that's why we want to address these policy violations as well as any of the bigger violations, right? And again, we want to look into them whenever there's an allegation of a policy violation to see if there is a bigger issue behind it. If there's bullying going on in the workplace, why is somebody being bullied? Is it just because maybe their sports team that they like or something? Or is it because they belong to a specific ethnic group? Is it because of their gender? Is it because of their marital status? Those are all protected classes, and those could be harassment claims waiting to happen. So again, that's why it's so important to look into those policy violations. And really, once you start investigating these policy violations, sometimes there is a bigger issue. Sometimes there's not, but sometimes there is. So this gives us a chance to address it as soon as possible. And one of the questions came up was, um, does this apply to our clients as well? Realistically, if you are managing or part of the management team in the workplace, guess what? It is our responsibility to provide a safe, respectful work environment for our employees. That doesn't just mean that, we're investigating our employees inside of our workplace. That means we have to protect them from any clients, from any outside vendors. Any of them could also be, can also violate some of these policies as well. So again, if you have outside vendors or clients that come in, they should be familiar with the kind of workplace that you have. And again, if there is any claims of harassment or discrimination against them, they should be investigated as far as you can. Sometimes you have to partner with their employer or with their agency in order to conduct that investigation all the way through. Yeah, I did see one question pop into my Q&A that's fairly specific regarding to a workplace. I'll address that one afterwards, okay? Let's talk about one of these scenarios. I have a couple scenarios for you, and sometimes, if you're in management, you will hear these claims come up from time to time. Complaints of a hostile work environment, right? And sometimes, these buzzwords get thrown around. Someone discriminated against me, someone's creating a hostile work environment, someone, is harassing me or what have you. We need to look into it, right? And let's see what the facts are, at least in this first scenario. We have an employee complaining of a hostile work environment. You question, and you find out that the supervisor is very strict about employee attendance. So what you do is, okay, you take this claim, you go look at the timesheets, you talk to the supervisor about attendance issues, and basically, that strictness means that they're writing anybody up that comes in late, everybody across the board. In this case, as long as you have a policy about attendance and having people have to be there on time, guess what? If they're doing it evenly across the board, that's the end of it. The supervisor is very strict. That's how they manage. There should be no violation there. No need for further investigation, right? Our second scenario, though, is kind of similar. There's a claim of a hostile work environment as well. But once you talk to the employee, they let you know, or you find out that they're only strict about certain employees, just specific employees. So once you look into a little further, you find out that only the female coworkers are being written up. Male coworkers who are late do not get written up or do not get treated the same as their female coworkers. So again, these allegations mean that there's possible gender discrimination. So in this case, it is necessary to conduct a thorough investigation to see if there's any kind of discrimination or harassment going on based on gender discrimination. Again, we're not looking just at that initial claim, right? There's a hostile work environment. That should trigger us to look into it. May not trigger full investigation until we get all the facts. So let's talk about some of these investigative triggers. I keep saying triggers. What triggers an investigation? Okay. Well, the first one, that's an easy one, right? An employee complaint. Employee comes forward, files a complaint with your HR department or with the manager. Hey, this person is doing, X, Y, and Z. This is going on. I need this fixed or what have you. So that's, we look into that. Sometimes these complaints can be anonymous as well, right? Still means we have to look into them, whether they're anonymous or whether we have a formal, written, signed, delivered in person complaint or what have you. Anonymous complaints can make it a little more difficult because, we don't know the person that's making the accusations, but there's still an issue identified and we should still look into it, right? We still need to go and see what is going on, see if there is an issue out in the workplace. Okay, the next one is suspicion. If we have suspicion of a company, of a violation of rules, a violation of expectations, right? If we suspect something's going on, that could merit a closer look into it. Okay. Next one, observed conduct. Okay. If you observe a situation, this kind of goes with the question that just popped up here. If you observe something going on, whether it's, a violation of policy right now, or whether it could become a violation of policy in the future, right? Something that just doesn't is bordering on violating company policy. That could mean that, you want to look into it a little further, right? Okay. Former employees, sometimes we've all seen this. If you've done any terminations, there's an employee walking out the door and they, for lack of a better analogy, they throw that hand grenade in there, right? Oh, by the way, before I leave, I need you to know so and so is a harasser, so and so is doing this, so and so is doing that, right? Someone's walking out the door and makes some allegations. You know what? We should still look into it. If we're terminating somebody and in the middle of termination, they make a claim, of something going on, doesn't mean we pause the termination, right? As long as the termination is legal, but we still need to look into that situation. Whether it happens at the time of termination, even if it's a former employee, a former employee calls us 2 weeks down the road, says, hey, this hasn't sat with me well, just need you to know what's going on. It's still a formal complaint. We should still take a look into it. Okay. Administrative, these are the easy ones. We get those letters from a lawyer's office asking us for an employee file or letting us know that a claim has been filed. Guess what? Automatic trigger. We need to start that investigation, right? Immediately when we get these, see what the facts of the situation are. Okay. Any changes in workplace behavior, that's why it's so important to know what the pulse of the workplace is. Maybe there's a change in the employee's attendance, right? Or maybe you'd notice that there was a group of employees that always sat together at lunch, took their breaks together, and all of a sudden the one person's kind of isolated themselves, right? Doesn't talk to them, doesn't want anything to do with them anymore. Could be just again, an innocent disagreement, something that doesn't have to do with work, something that doesn't have to do with anything, but it could merit at least looking into. And again, investigation triggers doesn't have to mean a full-fledged, full-blown investigation. It means you dive into it and start looking, gathering some information to see what is going on. Okay. And finally, persistent gossip and rumors. Of course, we know, there's never any gossip in the workplace, right? Well, guess what? Gossip does exist out there. And when we hear gossip, rumors, that sort of thing, maybe our initial reaction is to ignore it so it goes away or, but we should pay attention to that. What's the gossip? What's the rumors going around? Why is it originating? How do we address it? Again, because, if nothing else, if we address those rumors, that gossip, put a stop to it, hey, guess what? We will probably have a healthier workplace. Now, interesting question came up here. When you work in a small office, as the HR person, you personally observe situations that later turn into complaints. If you disagree with the employee about their perception of what occurred, can you or should you introduce your opinion and what part of the process? So we'll talk about this a little further going forward, but really, I mean, if an allegation is made and you're investigating it, you should be basing it on the facts of the situation, right? Any conclusions, right? So it's not really about our perception of the matter is, if we're looking at the situation, we're looking to see what the facts of it are. And again, if the person took a comment wrong or took something completely out of line, and we agree with the other person that said, hey, this was an innocent comment, there wasn't anything wrong. If there's no violation of company policy, no violation of any kind of rules, any kind of legal issue or anything, we can explain that to the person making the allegation, right? Said, hey, we looked into it, we found there was no violation of any company policy. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming forward. We have addressed the situation based on our policy. Thank you for bringing it up to us. Now, speaking of those investigations, though, let's talk about what our timeline should be when we are investigating. Okay. So really, when we get a complaint, I mean, we need to start the process as soon as possible. Okay. Realistically, I mean, there's always things going on, right? Maybe it's your busy season, maybe it's, inventory time, maybe, you're short-staffed or whatever. I mean, when we get an allegation, whether it's a policy violation or if it's something more serious, harassment, discrimination, that sort of thing, we need to start within days of receiving the complaint. Best practice we recommend is about 48 hours or about 2 days after we get the complaint. We start we start working on it, we start moving on it, right? And our goal is to wrap this up in a timely manner. Again, we're not going to overlook things or breeze over things. We're going to try to wrap this up usually within 2 weeks is our recommendation, but again, something that could be extended longer. I mean, we've done investigations where one of the people that was accused has been out of town for vacation or on a pre-planned trip or something for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, or whatever. So you kind of have to wait. But for the most part, if you don't have those extraordinary situations, you want to wrap this up usually within 2 weeks, right? Because the goal of it is, to investigate just the facts, get that focus, investigate it and get a solution to it. Okay. Another question we have gotten in the chat too, not jump around too much, but there's an important one, is what happens if an employee makes a complaint about a hostile work environment, but they ask you not to investigate? One thing to remember, again, we mentioned knew or should have known, right? So if we get a complaint and we're part of a management team, whether HR, supervisor, lead, whatever, we can't be soundboards. Once someone makes a complaint and we have knowledge of it, it is our professional responsibility to look into it and to address it based on our company policy, right? Because again, once we know, that means that the organization or the company knew or should have known this was going on, and it is their legal responsibility under California state law to address it. So again, even if the person says, hey, I don't want you to do anything about it. I just want to talk to you about something. If you're in the position of management, whether it's HR, supervisor, lead, whatever, as soon as somebody opens with that, you have to let them know, hey, I just want to let you know, as a manager, supervisor, whatever, if you tell me something that violates company policy, I am legally mandated to look into it. So we can't just kind of dismiss it or keep it between us, unfortunately. So now let's talk about selecting an investigator, whether it's an in-house person or a third party. So some things to consider if it's going to be an in-house investigator is, does the person have the authority to handle complaints, right? Who do you want handling those complaints or those investigations? Do you want the leads to look into certain allegations but not others? Do you want HR to look into everything? Do you want everything escalated to upper management? Have that policy outline or have that procedure outlined ahead of time, right? Something to keep in mind too is, if the investigation does become more serious and it's something that goes to court, for it to be admissible, the person that conducts the investigation has to be trained and qualified to conduct these investigations. Usually that means your HR person or someone on your management team that has investigative experience, that has done these investigations before, has some training to do them. They should be the ones that are conducting the investigation. Now, these investigations can be done with or without assistance. It could be just, hey, we have an HR manager, they're going to run the investigation. Or you can, bring in someone from the outside to help you with the investigation, to sit in there with you, to be a second set of ears, right? Someone from CEA, someone from another organization. Maybe you bring in, if you're a big enough organization where you have several locations, you bring in a manager from the other location to kind of be a second set of eyes and second set of ears for you there, right? Next scenario we have is, what if you select a third party? Maybe it's a big enough issue or serious enough where you decide, hey, we need an independent third party to look into it, someone that's outside of the organization, right? And something to keep in mind is, again, is this investigation going to be admissible in court, right? If it's a big enough to where we have to get a third party, you want it to be admissible in court. So in this case, the person conducting the investigation should be either a licensed attorney or a licensed private investigator. And again, this is just, again, FEHA requirements that if it's going to be admissible in court, that must be the third party conducting the investigation. They have specific training and, they know the legal requirements of conducting this investigation so that they don't run afoul of any legal requirements. So if you're selecting a third-party investigator, again, make sure that they fall into one of those two categories. Don't just bring in, don't just put a posting on Craigslist or something, or bring somebody off the street to conduct that investigation for you, thinking, hey, they're a third party, it's my brother-in-law, he doesn't work here, he can conduct it or whatever. Make sure that they fall into one of those two categories. So again, let's look to see if you're determining who is the right person to conduct this investigation. So again, allegation comes up. If you're the person that usually does the investigations, take a look, is there any bias that would interfere? Is the person being accused my roommate, my best friend, is it my boss maybe? Is it somebody that's above me in the organization? Can I investigate that, right? or even the perception of it, you know? Even if you do everything right, if the person that you're investigating is a family member or maybe a good friend or anything like that, even if you do everything right, check all the boxes, follow all the process, is there going to be, you know, the perception that there was bias in the result, right? You know, is that investigation going to be tainted afterwards to show that, hey, maybe it was as thorough or as far as it could have been? So again, not saying that's right, not saying that, you know, you would not be a professional and conduct the investigation completely impartially, but just, you know, what is it going to look like? So again, just some things to consider when you're determining if you're the right person to conduct that investigation. Let's talk about planning. You know, let's plan that investigation. So some things to consider while the investigation is going on is, do you have to do any personnel changes, right? Are the people involved on the same schedule? You know, is it somebody reporting to somebody else? Do we have to make some changes temporarily to be able to keep everybody working, everybody safe, and to conduct the investigation? You know, we're going to plan how we're going to gather evidence and prepare those witness questions, right? So first thing is interim action, you know. When the investigation is going on, I mean, you may need to change schedules, change the personnel, pending the outcome, right? And something to consider if you're going to, whether you should do it or not, is anybody in danger? You know, was there any kind of physical assault, physical issue going on? You know, was there any kind of violence going on that someone put someone in danger? Is an emotionally charged situation, right? Is a complainant highly emotional? Can they not function in that same environment for the time being? Reporting chain, you know, is it a claim against their direct supervisor, direct lead, that sort of thing, right? So keep in mind though, I mean, if it is someone within the reporting chain, say an employee files a complaint about their supervisor, if you're going to change the schedule, if you're going to put somebody off of work, you want to be careful if you're taking any action that involves a person making the allegation, right? Because it could be perceived as retaliation for making an accusation or for making a claim. So be very, very careful with that. And sometimes, you know, they say the road to you know where is paved with good intentions, right? Sometimes you say, hey, you know, this person, I mean, they're really emotional. You know, they don't want to work for the supervisor, so I'm gonna give them a week off. Well, guess what? That looks like you just retaliated against the person making the claim because they made the claim against that supervisor. So if you're going to make any kind of administrative leave, any kind of suspension, anything like that, make sure that, you know, you're looking to put the accused on any kind of administrative leave instead of the person making the allegation, right? Again, we want to protect ourselves from any claims of retaliation. When it comes down to gathering evidence, you know, it's we have to plan to see how we're going to do this, right? And again, first thing to do is determine the scope of the investigation. What are we investigating, you know? This is we shouldn't have a very broad net. If someone comes to you and says, hey, you know, this person is creating a hostile work environment because they called me names or whatever. Well, we're not going to look to see, you know, into this person's private life, into this person's other habits, into what they do in their off time, that sort of thing. This is an fishing expedition. We're not out there to look, see what we can find. We're going to focus on the allegations. You know, when did it happen? Where did it happen? Who was around? Who was involved? That sort of thing. That's what we focus on, right? I mean, we're going to look to see any relevant documents or policies. You know, what policies were violated? This is what we're going to base the investigation on. And then we're going to look at other information that goes along with it, right? If we have video in the workplace, we could look at that. You know, we could go visit the site. Any phone calls, texts, anything involved, you know, emails, that sort of thing that involve that particular situation, we are going to look into it. Not saying that things can't expand as you go along and other things can come up, but you want to keep focused on the scope, you know. If the investigation or the allegation was about harassment, that's what we're focused on. If during the course of the investigation you found out that somebody's stealing or somebody's, you know, not showing up to work or clocking out for somebody else, you're going to make a note of that, investigate it afterwards, but we're going to focus on the allegations and anything that is directly involved with it. All right, when it comes in to create a witness list, you know, obviously we're going to interview the person making the complaint, right? Even if they submit a written complaint, we still want to follow up in person, make sure there's consistency there, get any missing details. We want to talk to the accused, any witnesses to the alleged misconduct, right? Anybody that was listed. Usually the complaining party says, hey, well, so and so did this to me, and I was there with, Tom, Dick, and Harry. So we're going to talk to Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? Very simple in that case. Um, Anybody else with relevant information, though? Hey, where did it happen? Well, it happened in the lunchroom during break. Well, okay, we could find out, see who was there that day, and see if anybody should be talked to, even if they weren't named by the accused or the complaining party. Maybe we want to talk to a supervisor or the lead that was on duty that day to see what was going on. Okay. Again, the complainant could give you a list of people they want you to talk to. Hey, this guy's always a jerk to me. Talk to, Bob and Steve and Mary. Or the accused may tell you, oh, that's not true. I'm a good person. Talk to so and so, so and so, so and so. Well, you know what? We're going to make that determination to see if we need to interview these people. Just because they name 20 people doesn't mean we have to talk to all 20 of them, right? We make that determination to see who we have to talk to that's going to help us find a conclusion to those allegations, right? Just because they're named as witnesses doesn't mean we have to talk to them. Sometimes, it's enough for them to, if they submitted written statements, that may be all we need. Sometimes, we may not even need that. It could just be a little bit too much information, a little beyond what we need. So again, make that list. Not saying it can't change as you go along. Maybe, somebody else's name during your conversation you decide you need to talk to, but you want to have that initial list to kind of guide you to begin with. And that's all that this planning is, just a guide, of how we're going to conduct this investigation. It could change a little bit along the way, but it's kind of trying to keep you within the guardrails at this point. Confidentiality and privacy. This goes to that question we had earlier. What if someone just kind of tells you that someone's creating a hostile work environment but doesn't want to talk about it or doesn't want you to do anything, right? Well, I mean, sometimes, when we learn about something, we have to investigate, but we're going to maintain it as confidential as possible, right? Not saying we can always maintain it 100% confidential, but we're just not going to talk to everybody about it. But during the course of the investigation, hey, guess what? Sometimes, this information does come out, during the course of questioning, we're questioning the accused. Hey, on this date, did you call so-and-so a slur? Well, that's going to tell them, who the accuser is, but, we're just going to maintain it as confidential as possible, right? Can't guarantee complete confidentiality, but it's going to be on the strict need to know basis. And something very important to keep in mind too is any disciplinary actions are also confidential. We've all been part, if we've conducted investigations where at the end, the accuser comes up and says, well, what's going to happen to them? Did you write them up? Are they going to get fired? What did you do? I need to know. Well, no, you don't need to know. You need to know that we are addressing it based on our company policies. It's been addressed, that's all you need to know. If there's any repeat of it, if there's any other violations, if there's any other concerns, please bring them to us. But we do not need to tell you specifics of what disciplinary action was taken. And this is a tough pill to swallow sometimes because if the serious allegations, sometimes they want to see the person terminated or written up or suspended or what have you. And sometimes the investigation doesn't always lead to that. So we just want to let them know, hey, we followed company policy and disciplinary action was conducted based on company policy. Okay. Question came up as far as gathering evidence to if the person making the allegation has a text conversation between friends, can we ask the employee to provide it to us? And the thing is, text messages, social media, those things have been a boon for human resources because a lot of that stuff is just documented out there, right? So we can ask them to provide it. If it happens outside of work, we can ask them to provide it, whether they choose to or not. That's on them. Sometimes they volunteer it. Hey, this is the text message I got from so-and-so, or this is the text conversation I got. So we can ask for it again, if it's relevant to the information or to the investigation. All right. Let's move along to preparing those interview questions. I mean, the important part, right? And the thing about that is there's no definitive list, of these are the questions, that you're going to ask that are going to get you the answer, right? when we make a list of questions, it's not a script. It's not a questionnaire that we're going to pass out. It's just kind of something to keep us focused on where we how we're conducting the investigation, right? Again, sometimes we have to pivot as we go along. Sometimes we're having a conversation with a witness or with the accuser, and something just comes out of left field that we kind of have to chase down, right? So again, be adaptable, but have that initial guideline of what you want to ask, what you're trying to find out, right? Questions we ask, we want to give the witness, the accuser, the accused a chance to talk. There's I believe like an 80-20 rule. They should be doing 80% of the talking. We should only be doing 20%, if that. So we're going to ask open-ended questions to get them to volunteer to give us that information, right? We're going to avoid those direct questions early on. We're going to want them to organically give us that information, and we're going to guide them kind of with those open-ended questions. Again, as the interview goes on, if the witness hasn't given us the information or they're being elusive, then we ask the more direct questions. On this date, did you call so-and-so this name? Yes or no? That sort of thing. But first, we want to start open-ended to get that, get their perspective of it. Okay. Scheduling the interviews can always be, it could be challenging, depending on when these things happened, when the people work, availability, that sort of thing. So we're going to work with HR supervisors to schedule them, make sure that these people the people are available to us, right? We don't have to explain the purpose of the meeting, to everybody. Again, we're maintaining confidentiality. We just have to let people know, hey, we need to talk to so-and-so about something. Not giving people advance notice is important because we want to get their initial reaction to things without a chance to prepare, without a chance to commiserate, right? We want to get people's true reactions to things, okay? And again, we don't want people to talk to each other because sometimes that story gets out there, people form their own opinions, and next you're interviewing witnesses and it sounds like they're all reading from the same script, right? So it's important to not give too much notice so that we can get people's initial true reaction to things. Sometimes people will want to participate, right? Whether it's witnesses, the complainant, or the accused, they don't want to participate. We still have to continue with the investigation, right? We'll make attempts to get them to participate. If they don't, whether they just don't show up, whether they don't return our calls, whether they come into the interview room and just sit there with their mouths closed and their arms crossed, we're going to document that, make a note of it, and move on with the investigation. Again, we're just going to conduct the investigation based on the facts that come of it, right? That's what's gonna give us our conclusion. So we consider disciplinary action for not complying, right? So if it's the accused, if it's a witness or anything like that. But again, if it's the complainant, be very careful with disciplinary action because it could look like retaliation. And again, there's no right to representation in the interview. So some people say, well, I'll go talk to you, but I want to bring my lawyer or what have you. And this is just a work-related interview. This is not a civil or or there's not a court action, I should say. Only exception is if it's a union environment, then again, they can have union representation in there. But for the most part, there is no right to representation during that interview. So very important graphic here. If you're conducting investigations, you may want to print this one up, put it in your cubicle in your office. What to say in every interview. We're going to talk about cooperation, right? People's duty to cooperate and answer questions truthfully. No retaliation. Very important to reiterate that to all the people involved, that there is a no retaliation policy from the company, guided by the state. We're going to talk about that limited confidentiality, right? People can only find out on the need to know basis, but we can't guarantee 100% confidentiality. We're going to talk to them about the procedure, how we're going to take notes, what's going to happen to the information, how to get in touch with you if there's some more information. And then if you're conducting a remote interview on video, Zoom or Skype or what have you, make sure you verify that you're alone in your office, not recording the interview, and that the person you're interviewing confirms with that, right? Make sure that, ask them too, are you in the office? Are you by yourself? Who's in there with you? That sort of thing. Make a note of that. We want to make sure, we get that information. It's very important to get that. These slides will be provided to everybody. If you haven't received the presentation, make sure you email Sarah in the chat and she will send it over to you. All right. So background questions, again, when we're making those questions, very important because we want to set the tone for the interview, right? We want to make it conversational. We want to make the person comfortable and relaxed so they provide information to us, right? Questions like start the conversation, how long have you worked for the company? Where do you work? What are your responsibilities? That sort of thing. That establishes rapport, and that also kind of tells you, what the person is going to be like in the interview. If you ask them, hey, how long have you worked for the company? And they immediately clam up or they're confrontational about it, that kind of sets the tone to how the rest of the interview is going to go, right? So again, we want to use those icebreaker questions to kind of start the conversation, get a little more information about them, but also kind of establishes the tone of the rest of the interview. So again, some tips, stay focused on the task at hand. I mean, some interviewees like to go along a lot of tangents. So we kind of want to keep people, a little bit corralled, right? We want to give them the opportunity to talk, but if they start going way, way off topic, we want to bring it back around a little bit, okay? Again, that 80-20 rule, the employee should be talking 80% of the time. We're not interrupting or filling in gaps. We're getting their basically in their own words, right? If something's not clear, when they ask for clarification, okay? Not asking for speculation, right? We're looking for facts. We're looking for what they saw, okay? Don't shy away from those tough questions. I mean, that's why we're conducting that investigation, right? We need to know these things. So, okay. Be very straightforward. I mean, we're not there to trick anybody, right? We're not setting traps, This isn't law and order. We're not trying to catch somebody in the act or, bust somebody for something, right? We're gathering facts. That's what we're doing. Okay. And finally, in our notes, we want to make sure we're including any nonverbal cues. Did the person seem nervous? Did they start avoiding eye contact at a specific question? Did they have any kind of nervous reaction to something? I mean, that sort of thing. We want to make sure that we make a note of it. Maybe they came in, and they were very stressed and they're with their arms crossed as the interview went along. They kind of relaxed, opened up. You asked a specific question. Guess what? They clamped up again. Make a note of that. Those nonverbal cues are very important. Sometimes, our physical actions tell more of the story than what our words do. So we want to make sure we make a note of those. Right. So after conducting your investigations, we're looking to reach conclusions, right? That was the whole purpose of it. So when it comes to reaching those conclusions, we're looking at credibility, right? Sometimes the stories don't line up. So who are we going to believe? Okay. Prepare a report. Again, for this thing to be admissible or to be able to go back to it in the future, we want to have a good report for it. That includes the findings for each of the allegations that were made. So again, determining credibility, that's where that training, that's where conducting these investigations comes in very important, right? So what we're looking for is inherent plausibility, the person's demeanor. If they lied, why would they lie? What's their motive? Corroboration, which stories line up? Do all the witness statements line up with the accuser, with the accused? None, both? What is it, And past record. I mean, these things, the past record is important, right? If someone is accused of harassment, for example, that's an easy one. And we go back in their file and you know what? They've been accused and suspended 4 or 5 times before. Not saying it's a slam dunk, but it doesn't look good. So, okay. So we want to make sure that we're looking at all those things, right? Inherent plausibility, that's one of the things that, we mentioned is the thing about that, what that means is it believable, right? Does it make sense? Did the chronological order of the allegations make sense, right? Or is there a plausible explanation as to why it happened, I mean, that's what inherent plausibility is. How believable is it? Is the allegation or is the response believable? Again, we talk about those physical reactions that we want to make note of, some clues, things that there could be, person could be lying is, did they nod and shake their head? Does their body language agree with what they say, right? If they say no and they nod their head like this, and they say yes and do that, I mean, those are the simple ones, right? But you're looking at other physical things, does the person start sweating when you ask a specific question? Is there any kind of physical nervousness, fidgeting, that sort of thing? I mean, does the tone of their voice change when they talk about specific things or answer one question as opposed to other? Those are all things that, can kind of give you some idea that maybe they're not being as truthful as it could be, or that they're withholding some information. So again, even if you can't pull more information, we want to make a note of those things, right? When it comes time to reach that determination of these allegations, we're not looking for, yes, this 100% happened. No, this 100% did not happen. What the CRD, the Civil Rights Department, formerly known as the Department for Employment and Housing, tells us is that, we're looking for, is it more likely than not that the allegation is true, right? Or what they call 50% plus a feather. Is it more likely that this happened or not? So in your report, you're going to say, going to summarize your allegations, who you talked to, the information you gathered, any documents that you use, whether it's policies, whether it's handbooks or whatever. And we're going to make our conclusions based on the facts, not legal conclusions. We're not lawyers. We're not the judge and jury here. We're just looking at the facts. So we're going to determine, hey, it is likely that so-and-so harassed so-and-so by making this comment. Or it is not likely that this happened because of this and this and this, right? Or if it's inconclusive, and that can happen. I mean, sometimes we have a he said, she said, she said, whatever it is, where we can't determine if something happened or not. We're going to document that. We cannot get a conclusion. There was no evidence either way. Sometimes that happens. It's not satisfying for anybody, but it does happen on occasion, okay? Again, that report should be confidential. We're not going to file this report in the personnel files of everybody involved, right? We're going to keep a separate file for these reports, only share it on a need-to-know basis. It could be with executives, it could be with managers, it could be with, if it's a peanut or something, or it goes to court later on or something, then we need to share it, right? Once you finalize a report, you can destroy or maintain any of the notes, because really the notes that you're taking are just to aid you in creating that report. So once that's done, you can either attach them to the back of your report, you can destroy them because you capture anything, whatever it is, but, be consistent. If you do it for one investigation, if that's your process, follow that same process for everyone that you do. Because if you have one investigation where you're adding notes, pictures, everything else, and then 3 other ones where, there's nothing there except for just a summary, it's not going to look good, right? So we want to make sure once we get that process down, we're being consistent across the board. Okay. I also talked, or I mentioned earlier, the importance of corrective action, okay? Now, when you conclude the report, you're going to look to see, were there any policy violations? Yes or no. If there were any, then the law requires us to take, remedial steps when there's any proof of misconduct, right? So we're going to look at the severity. How severe was the policy violation? Is it very severe? Is it not? We're going to look at what our policy is as far as corrective action, and we're going to apply it correctively, right? So some of the things we can use are written warnings, performance improvement plans, coaching, suspension, termination, or even additional training, right? So maybe if you're in an investigation for a harassment allegation, turns out it didn't rise to the level of harassment, but the behavior was troubling to you. Guess what? Maybe some additional training is in order, right? And then, if at the end you find that, yes, there was discrimination that took place. Yes, there was harassment. Yes, there was retaliation. In those cases, we recommend that you consult legal counsel, especially when your corrective action involves suspension, termination, anything serious. You're going to want to make sure to consult your legal counsel, because they are going to let you know what your exposure is, what your risk is, when you do any corrective action based on those findings. Okay. So let's talk about closing out. You conducted your investigation, you found your conclusions. What is the next steps? Well, again, HR or management, whoever was involved in the investigation, you got to talk to all witnesses, thank you for your participation, and let them know that the investigation has been concluded, right? Remember that personal action is confidential. So you only told the complainant that the actions were taken were consistent with the company policy, or, any changes that are going to involve them, right? Again, there's no need to give everybody a summary of everything that's going to happen to everybody involved, So if the accuser asks you, hey, what's going to happen to so-and-so, you're going to say, we're going to address it based on company policy, based on the findings. May not sit well with them, may upset them, may not be satisfying, but this is what needs to be done to protect you and your organization, right? Again, we're going to reiterate to all parties, there's no retaliation for participating, for raising the allegation, for being a part of it. So, and let them know that if there is anything they want to talk about afterwards, any retaliation, any complaints, they need to bring those up to you or to a member of management immediately. Again, we want to make sure we maintain that open door policy for them to be able to report any issues, either that go along with this or any issues that arise in the future, and keep a copy of that report for at least 4 years. Again, in a separate file, not in the employee file, we're going to hold on to that report for at least 4 years. And that's just in case, again, any legal action comes up or anything, you want to make sure that you could reference that report going forward. Okay. So it comes to follow through. It's very important to make sure that we are following up at the conclusion of it, right? So, once the investigation is closed, you issue corrective action or you don't, depending on what comes up. You're going to want to follow up on a regular basis, to make sure that the problem was solved, whether it was a real problem, a perceived problem, whatever it is. You're going to want to follow up to make sure that things have moved on, right? So maybe set a calendar reminder, talk to the accuser and the accused in a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is, right? Make sure that the problematic behavior has stopped. Okay. Again, your frontline managers, supervisors, they are so important in addressing these issues to make sure they don't escalate. So you want to train them. If there was any learnings, any issues that you spotted during the investigation, use it as a learning opportunity with those managers, with those supervisors, to make sure that they're addressing these issues before they escalate to that point, right? You're still got to follow up with the complainant to make sure that the issue's been resolved. Make sure it's been resolved and they have continued to work comfortably, right? Whether it was a true issue, whether it was a matter of perception, whether it turned out that you had to issue corrective action or not, we're still following up with them to make sure that they're moving on, that they're still comfortable to work, that it's been resolved to their satisfaction to a point, right? We want to make sure in these follow-ups, right? We're going to document these follow-ups just to make sure that the behavior has stopped, especially if you found that there was some wrongdoing or something. So, you could ask that complainant, hey, is everything going okay? Everything going better? Yep. Okay. Well, I'm just going to document this conversation that the behavior has stopped or has not resumed. Would you like to sign it, please? Just to make sure. Again, this is just to protect yourself and the company, show that you have taken those steps to correct the issue, right? Keep reassuring the complainants or keep reassuring everybody involved of those protections from retaliation about participating about those complaints, right? That is so important. I mean, you don't want people to be afraid to bring things up, because the more people that bring these issues to your attention early on, the easier it is to address them to make sure they don't escalate to bigger issues. So some takeaways for today for you, pay attention, right? Get to know your workplace, know what the environment is like, know what, get what's the pulse of the organization, right? Know when things change, right? If you get a complaint or spot an issue, respond to it promptly. Don't put it off. Don't back burner it. Don't wait till after inventory or after the Christmas party or what have you. Address it as soon as possible, right? If you need to investigate, make sure you select the appropriate investigator for it, whether it's internal or external. Make sure to document and summarize your findings, whether it's a full-blown investigation, whether it's something you look into. Documentation is so important. You could reference it in the future, or if it's, if there's a repeat of it, you have the documentation where you could take true corrective action going forward. And again, corrective action should be meaningful, right? Not a slap on the wrist. We're not going to be nicer to this person than that person. We want to be consistent and make sure that the corrective action is meaningful. And finally, follow up. We want to follow up to make sure that the issue has been corrected, the issue has been resolved, it is not happening again. And before we go, we got another question that popped up here. Is there any reason why we should or should not communicate next steps in an email, or should be a verbal conversation with the participants? You could do it by email as long as, again, you're very general, right? We're not disclosing any private information. It's need to know. So if we're telling, the participants, hey, we've closed the investigation, we will be, we will be addressing it based on our company policy. Absolutely, you could do it in an email. Again, be very general. Don't disclose more information that you need to. I'd like to thank everybody for sitting through us for this hour here. I know some of you may be here for continuing education. So if you are have HRCI certification and you're here for continuing education, the code for you is 625262. That's 625262. And for SHRM, that's 25-KMR6R. 25-KMR6R. And let's see, we got some questions. I have Mr. Dobbins. I will stay on to address that issue or that question with you. For everybody else, if you would like to drop off, I do have the last slide with our hotline numbers for you. Again, if you had not received the presentation, please send Sarah a message on the chat, and she will send that over to you. And if you are interested in becoming members of CEA, we do have a couple different plans or different levels you can join us in: Ultimate, Premier, or Associate. Associate, if you're interested in, you can join on a month-to-month basis. All the other ones are yearly subscriptions. And please, we would love to get your feedback on this presentation or on other topics you would like to hear about. Please, we ask that you scan this QR code with your phone. It will take you over to the link, and you can provide us any kind of feedback on this presentation. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I will ask Sarah to leave me on for a minute here so I can answer this other question, and we will